Welcome to the Cyber Talent Series. I'm Phoebe, joined by my co-host Thomas, and today we're talking with Paul and Justin, co-founders of Validia AI. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, in case anyone listening or watching hasn't heard of you all, do you mind just giving the quick spiel on Validia?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Validia, what we've built is a hiring security platform for validating that the people coming into your hiring pipeline and the people you bring into your organization are who they say they are. We look at a mix of identity, so validating that there's a consistent identity as that person onboards into the company. We look for deepfakes to verify that their identity is authentic, as well as location detection to find their true location and cheating detection. At the end of the day, our goal is to make sure the people you hire are who they say they are and are authentic individuals to bring into your organization.
Yeah, awesome. So, to get started, do you mind just telling us a little bit about Validia and what inspired its creation?
Absolutely. So I'm Paul, our CTO and co-founder here at Validia. I've spent the last 10 years in the cybersecurity industry, really focusing on newer threats in the space, things that adversaries are using today and are kind of the frontier technologies and attack techniques in the space. And back in, 2023, as I was graduating from UVA, I was doing some of the initial research on ChatGPT and how adversaries are using it to stage more advanced attacks. So how they'd use ChatGPT to advance and enhance their social engineering, how they would get better at creating malware with ChatGPT. And so I went out to speak at the RSA conference on that, and especially as ChatGPT was so new, just kind of on the ways it was going to be leveraged, and ended up catching up with Justin, who I knew from UVA, and we started talking about not just the text or ChatGPT implementations, but how image, video, and audio generation models were going to be used for these cyber attacks. And so what it really started out as is, we were looking at the market and realized there's not really a ton of viable or scalable deepfake detection in the cybersecurity space today. A lot of people are using these big heavyweight AI models to detect fake, and we thought there's a more scalable way to do so, and B, there's a way or certain areas we should look at specifically to make sure that deepfakes aren't present. And so that's really where it all kicked off, is kind of like looking at how AI is being used, seeing generative AI evolve over the last few years, and starting to see some real attack examples come from adversaries.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I think the work you guys do is so cool. So 2023 was obviously kind of post-COVID. I'm curious, do you think remote work has permanently changed or like enhanced the extent to which companies need to be focused on identity verification and preventing fraud?
Yeah, I think though there's kind of the push for return to office now, it's become very normalized to have meetings in a virtual environment. Whether that's an external client, a vendor, an interview. All these things used to cost a significant amount of money, and frankly, during COVID, what people learned is that they can kind of strike those items out of the budget. And if you're a publicly traded company, it's definitely not coming back. But I think in general, remote work really transformed the landscape, and generative AI was just a catalyst to these types of attacks that we're starting to see more and more, from DPRK workers or even individuals that realize you can really take advantage of the fact that everything is virtual. And I think that learning curve was pretty rapid at first. I think, everyone ran into Zoom bombers, which was a big issue in college courses where someone would jump in. But I think now we're starting to see it in a more serious lens where companies are being infiltrated by individuals who are posing as others, or even using these advanced phishing techniques. I do think that remote work is here to stay. It's was kicked off by COVID, but is staying because of the convenience and because of the cost savings it drives for larger organizations.
So cool. So I think, one of the things we talk about internally is like, we're kind of at the intersection of like, like people stuff, like HR and security, and you guys are even more so, I'd say. How do you think about like how what you do and like the evolving threats like change the habits of like an HR recruiting type person, just as they go through like what they would normally just try and do without having to worry about that stuff?
Well, ideally, with the technology that we're building, we try to make it so their workflows and their day-to-day doesn't get changed at all. That's our goal at Validia, is to build things that make it so you can keep that same workflow. But obviously, not everyone has Validia's technology, and there are things that do change, especially in this virtual workplace where you don't know who you're hiring. So what we're seeing is, a myriad of different threats that HR talent people are facing today. We're seeing them try to identify when there's proxy candidates or an identity shifts throughout the interview process. They need to look and see if there's a potential deepfake. So that's things like asking people to wave their hand in front of their face, do a full 360, and then make certain motions on camera. We see stuff with AI cheating. That's one of the harder ones actually to flag today because it's literally completely invisible. And so we see people trying to watch for people reading on screen or try and put answers into a AI detector. And then location too. It's like if I get on a video call with you, I'm joining a company completely remotely, and I say that, for example, I'm in, California. It's so easy for me to convince you that I'm in California when I might be in the UK or I might be in Germany. And so realistically, it's not just that there's a new threat for HR people to look at. There's multiple different threats for them to look at. And frankly, it's hard to identify some of those even with manual cues, manual questions. And that's really the most difficult part.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, some of those manual tests are um, I'm sure it works well, but there's more to do, and I would assume also for teams that have not had that technology or have not run those tests in the past, who knows kind of where they're at. How would you advise these non-technical leaders, people managers to run an assessment of their org and sort of future proof it, but also kind of retrospective?
Yeah, I'd say that it's a really difficult thing to do, especially with existing technologies that HR teams have today. The way we've seen HR teams try and tackle this problem is do a manual ID check with identity confirmation for every employee inside of the organization. In some unique cases, we've seen people actually come in and fly into an in-person office to do that validation as well. But frankly, the issue that resides there is IDB and KYC checks are really not sufficient for a lot of these deepfakes that we're seeing. Their IDs are a lot easier to deepfake than someone in a live video call. And so these ID deepfakes are insanely good. So I'd say that's the way we're seeing it be done today. We encourage a more continuous and kind of it's almost like the future proofing both helps you assess and helps you prevent these things in the future. We recommend more of a continuous approach, get something deployed inside of your environment that's continuously establishing and evaluating the identity of people inside of your organization rather than doing those one-time checks. Because especially you do a one-time check and you're not future proofing, well, tomorrow you might have someone else, but you might already have someone. So ideally you can kind of bundle the two up.
The fake ID thing it was way easier back when I was starting college 15 years ago. I think I just got someone else's ID who was 6 inches shorter than me, but it worked.
It's the same way with background checks. They don't even the same way a bouncer doesn't look at your height or your eye color when you give an ID. It's the same way a background check doesn't look at the picture. As long as you have a good enough looking picture on there that matches you, you can't tell it's a deep fake, then you're going to pass those checks.
I think the bouncers were probably a little less diligent in the review process. Well, hopefully, at least. My next question is so talked about interviews a little bit, but what about before that? Some of these companies have thousands and thousands of resumes to screen. How do you do that well? And how do you run some preventative measures for that?
There's a bunch of tools out there today. A cool company to shout out is a company called Strider. They have databases of resumes that have been used, a million times, and pick up little tidbits of things they miss. One of our partners actually just mentioned that one of the kind of flaws in some of these DPRK applications is around the author of the actual Word document that they send as a resume, typically is never changed. So there's new tools and such that you can use, which also have interesting legal implications. There's the EU AI Act, where you essentially can't really make a binary decision based on artificial intelligence saying this candidate is good, this candidate is bad. There's discrimination, potentially lawsuits, a lot of big issues, but that's why we don't really see the resume kind of screener as extremely viable. You can pick up tidbits here and there, but it is unfortunately always going to be a bit of a manual process. It's really a double-edged sword, and that's the biggest problem with AI today, and frankly why we started the company. Is because we saw everyone looking at the productivity gains of artificial intelligence, and we knew that the counter side to that is that adversaries, to be honest, will be the first people people to weaponize this type of technology, and it's advancing too fast for modern cybersecurity solutions to really keep pace.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess quickly you kind of touched on it, but going back a little bit to the beginning of Validia, was there a certain case or news story you remember seeing that really introduced the idea of like this is a gap we need to solve?
I think there's like two stories throughout like the timeline of Lydia that like define kind of this problem for us. Back like when we started in 2023, there were less of like your communication channel and video conferencing deepfakes. But there were two that I remember seeing. One was a picture of the Pentagon got released. It was a picture that Bloomberg had posted, I believe, and it had got edited to make it look like the Pentagon had exploded. And there was this distinct like, look, this was a completely fake image created with a free tool, and it had a full-blown financial impact, like billions of dollars on the financial market. Another one that we saw, which was more on like the reputation side, but like in specific to a company, is it was not a deep fake. Eli Lilly, there was a fake account spun up for Eli Lilly, and it had like the check mark and everything, and they posted like insulin is now free, and it caused Eli Lilly's stock to drop. It's like, again, that one was not a deep fake, but all I could think in my head is imagine if there was a video of this guy at a press conference saying this, it just like would become 10 times more believable for people. And so those are some early instances. And then as we were building some of our initial deepfake detection, we started to see some of those video conferencing deepfakes. And then the other example that I like to reference is back in 2023, the MGM ransomware attack that summer. That did not use a deepfake, but it was like less technical than a deepfake and still caused the largest cyber attack of that year and maybe even like the prior years as well. In that attack, someone called the help desk, pretended to be an employee, didn't use a deepfake, talked in their own voice, and just convinced them that they were this employee, got Okta access codes or Okta reset codes, got into the Okta, and then the rest is history. And so those are some of the early instances that really drove a lot of the development and a lot of like the approach that we're looking at. And then obviously over the years, or I guess over the last year, we've seen more issues with the candidate space, and we've really started to see deepfakes kind of working their way into a lot of different areas.
How would you assess like the level of interest and concern? Because you're talking about two different like functional groups and stakeholders, HR and security. How would you assess like the different level of focus on preventative measures for that stuff in those two functional groups?
I'd like to split like security and HR by based on concern. Like what's the thing they're concerned about? I think security is really concerned about DPRK IT workers. I think the hiring and people teams are really focused on the fraud side. Is there, even if it's not DPRK, is there a fake candidate coming through? Is there an identity swap happening? Is this person in the right location? Now, those things cross over a lot, as you can imagine. But I would say that's kind of where we see the interest. It's almost like if the company is really concerned about hiring fraud, the people teams are really concerned. If they're really concerned about DPRK, the security team's on top of it.
Yeah, I feel like we see a very like bottoms up level, approach and like level of interest. Like often the people managers or, even more senior, like we work with some CISOs, but for the most part, it's like who's leading the SOC, who's leading like the security engineering team. That's who we're sort of selling our skill development stuff to. And usually it's like they're going to look to their teams for like the recommendations. So I guess that really like is pushed up. Like what are we focused on? And then like the crossover into HR is like they're mostly like, hey, like tell me what I should care about.
Yeah, it's feeling the pain, right? Like all the cold inbound we get is from VP of talent, head of talent. They see it, right? Like they're seeing it or they're being told that it is happening. But I totally agree with Paul there too. Like I do think there is a distinct split between people that are seeing it in real time, and then there's also just this broad, like RSA this year, there was a lot of talk about it. There's been a huge, Wall Street Journal headlines around DPRK IT workers. And this problem is like not going away.
I've been in situations where, you're talking to like HR leaders, and just in general, like how do you sell to them? Like, that kind of thing. So, I'm sure you're talking to those people all the time. I'm curious, like just focused on like your tech and the solution you're solving. Like, what do you hear from them that like drives you crazy?
I think they're overlooked. I think, like you said, it's like there's this now assumption that these people that are supposed to just be recruiting and hiring now also need to be bouncers, right? Like throw it back to that. Like it's not their job to determine whether the ID that they're seeing up front is fake or real. That's supposed to be the background checks job. But like obviously there are lapses in that, and now the responsibility is being flung to the top of the funnel. So I think that's why there's this sort of interest where it's, hey, I can get this assistance without having to constantly learn the newest, attack techniques, what the newest technology is, what the thing I should be looking for, how I should be addressing the candidate in order to potentially screw up, AI assistants that are running locally, right? It's a reputational thing. If you put a DPRK person through, and let's say you did your job absolutely perfectly, but someone's using the most up-to-date, high-tech deepfake mask and poses as someone else, you will never have that business again. And like the stats on recurring revenue for recruiters are like 60 to 70%. So you can't afford to lose these people. So there's that angle, and also just the education part. Like, yes, everyone's got to be educated on cybersecurity and such. And, there's only education for HR individuals and no tools for them, or talent individuals. So I think that's sort of why we're getting a lot of traction today, because we are the helping hand that no one's ever extended to them.
So to go deeper on that, thinking about, because we think a lot about like the whole cycle and process of like, hiring. So like within that whole cycle, like I would imagine there's like value in what you guys do, or just the identity management and verification, like throughout that whole process. How do you all think about best practices sort of across, like from sourcing all the way through like talent management?
Sourcing is hard because on the talent side, it's inbound, right? Like I put out a job, recruiters apply people for that job or individuals, right? So it's just really difficult to kind of screen, which again is one of the kind of big pain points we have. It's, hey, we want to be able to screen a lot more of these people really early on, so we don't waste time and waste money, right? So the point of it is to screen early, and often continuously, but it continues throughout the entire interview process. So there's really just a set it and forget it type of mindset where, while there are different stages of recruiting, frankly, there's not a lot of tools that can do that and, really apply to all of those scenarios. So that's why we wanted to embed ourselves within the actual vehicle, which delivers all of those stages, which is ultimately video conferencing for most, if not all, companies.
Makes total sense. I feel like that's what we're, ideally that's like kind of where we will get to as well, like where we're enabling, limited disruption around like the ability to assess skills, because you're kind of like assessing identity, like verifying. We're like assessing skills, like, okay, like do you, like what are you good at, like what gaps do you have? So like that's like within the organization, and then like moving up the talent life cycle, like helping hiring managers like narrow down like these massive lists of candidates sooner, helping to onboard and like kind of validate and like build those skills plans. So yeah, I mean, I think like the ability to just like inject that into an organization is like really hard without like disruption.
To be honest too, like the reason why we want it to be this way is so that there's this natural stickiness, right? Like HR and hiring is one part, but that's, you're opening the door to the organization. What happens once they're in, right? Let's say there's someone in there, and that's really where we see this product kind of evolving is, we capture one usage of video conferencing, but most usage is, I'd say interviews probably like 5% of, if not that, probably 1% of overall video conferencing usage for an organization. It's not for interviewing, right? There's not Zoom for hiring, right? It's Zoom. And what we see is the ability to actually expand and become, this internal, insider threat tool where you're able to gather identity logs on all of your employees, ensure that, post-hire, post-onboarding, this individual state maintains the same identity, as we've seen a lot of that stuff change. And I'm sure is an issue for you guys, right? Like, how do you know that the individual that takes your assessment is actually that individual? Is it an ID? Is it something else? And later on, is it still that individual that did take that test? And so that's really where we see it expanding, and that stickiness within that video conferencing solution really does help drive that point.
Awesome. So I'm curious, what are some of the biggest trends that you're seeing right now in attempted, hiring and interview fraud or other video conferencing fraud?
Well, obviously DPRK is like the number one we're hearing right now. It's the number one thing that security teams are like talking about regarding the space, and it's also the one that we're seeing happen often. Obviously, the DOJ just had a big like crackdown on DPRK IT workers and laptop farms around the U.S. But obviously, they're still active. That while it may have hindered them, they're still moving. Apart from that as well, we are still obviously seeing the identity swaps happening. One thing that's been interesting too is I think that if you look back like a year ago, a lot of like CISOs in general were pretty unsure about, what the right thing to start off with in terms of detection was in this space. Was it internal employee fraud? Was it external like vendor fraud? Was it candidates? I think there was like a big like what if or question mark there. I'd say that towards the end of last year and early this year, it shifted towards DPRK IT workers who's coming in that candidate security perspective. But I'd almost say as well that now internal employees also becoming a big concern. When we started with like the hiring approach, we were getting mainly just questions about the hiring side, hiring security, but more recently it's questions about hiring security and then how do we do it internally as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes total sense. Are there any like myths or misunderstandings around how companies are or aren't protected, or just kind of anything in like the online identity and verification space that you would debunk?
I mean, myth number one I hit on earlier, but I want to hit on it again is like background checks don't work. They don't look at ID photos. There's no way for them to look at ID photos. They can do it through an IDV provider, but an IDV provider just matches a selfie to an image on the of the ID. I think a lot of people have always seen background checks as this gold standard in security for the last 20 years. I do think a lot of people are starting to realize that's not the case, but that's definitely one I would debunk. I would say as well that like, and this is another like legacy thing. I'd say like MFA is not the solution for this, especially on the internal side. If I can call somebody and convince them to try it all off or to like let me through or give me access to all of those things, it doesn't matter that those things were there in the first place. I think there's this big thing in the like, it's always been in the cyber industry. It's like your weakest link is the person. But I do actually think that there's like an opposite view of that I like, which is like humans are the most important security asset that you have. And I really do think it's important for one, obviously to train, but also to augment these people. Like unfortunately, deepfakes and generative AI make it like there's impossible scenarios where like it doesn't matter, like your senses are deceiving you, like there's nothing you can do about that. But I do think there's ways to augment that, provide certain metrics, provide certain things there that allow you to have a good response, or at least understand what you're seeing and be able to form a good response around it. So those are my three myths, I'd say.
No, I honestly think Paul covered a lot. The one thing that I just kind of learned even outside the company is just that like KYC and AML stops like zero fraud. The checks might work, and we've talked about how their thresholds are low. But like Paul mentioned, right, most of this is for compliance purposes. And bad actors are smart. Like they know all of this stuff exists. They know how to break it, and it's just ignorant to think that there isn't enough information out there for them to do that. So while we try to protect as much as possible, the larger issue is just that there's too much information and too many tools, which I think people overlook so frequently, around how to really defend yourself against these attacks. There's always some sort of vulnerability. There's always something to patch. It's the classic cat and mouse game, and everyone is victim to it. And to be honest, it's becoming harder and harder as defenders because there's just so much PII and data out there.
I'll add a couple too. I think like one misconception in the industry is like that in the hiring process, like any one thing is like a deal breaker or like the most important thing. In general, hiring processes are like very comprehensive. You're not getting cut just because you like miss a couple questions on like some assessment. And so like I feel like that's like there's this whole like wave against like assessments. And yeah, some of them, like if companies are like asking people to do too much and spend too much time, like free labor, like that's not great. But yeah, I feel like that's one thing. And then the other that comes to mind is like I feel like everyone just constantly talks about like the cyber talent shortage. I think what in general for companies, like what resonates the most is like we're in like the era of like downsizing and like hiring freezes and things. And like, so for people managers and just like managers in general, how are you going to save them time? Like, how are you going to make things better for them? And like, maybe they're having to hire like imperfect candidates and just sort of like deal with the team that they have today.
You have less less room for error, right? And then add that they need to know all these new techniques that are designed to trick them and always evolving, right? Like the stakes have never been higher, and there has not been pretty much any innovation in that space like we talked about before.
I think that it points to some of what we were just talking about, points to the case to be made for arming folks with tools and technology that can support them. So again, whether it is with some of this fraud prevention or Thomas, in our case, with upskilling, I think it's like, how can you really provide the people that you do have with tools to help them get the work done, especially if there are, like hiring freezes or cuts made where someone might be taking on work that they hadn't before.
So y'all have been doing this for a while now. If you think back to like when you got started, like what's the most interesting thing you've learned? Is there anything you'd do different if you were starting right now versus like when you started?
I would say like there's like a really, really psychological aspect to deepfakes and how people like impersonate an identity. A great example is like DPRK IT workers. Like one of the things that is actually a viable approach to potentially detect DPRK workers. The person who coined this is Adam Myers at CrowdStrike. It's you ask basically like how fat is Kim Jong-un, and they'll all leave the call. Like it's like clockwork. Like it's legitimately they can't answer that question. And I'm not making that up. That people have tried that and it does work. So like long story short, I mean that's just an example, but I think there's a really interesting like psychological approach to deepfakes. And one of the things that we've learned in having to create some of these ourselves and make them seem realistic is that like there's ways that you can convince people they're real without needing to look at a real stream the whole time. Like I can jump on a call as a deepfake of Justin for like 30 seconds, be like, oh my God, my Wi-Fi is kind of choppy, like turn it off, like turn it back on, make it look like it's a flicker. And I just convince that person that like it is me or a Justin, but and so anyways, I just think there's a really cool psychological aspect. So that's interesting to me. I would say, if there's anything that we could change going back, I'd say really the only thing is like we started with like deepfake detection and progressed into identity authentication. I actually would have flipped that, namely because identity was a or always has been a big problem, still is, still was. But deepfake detection and deepfakes have been something that have become more prominent over the years. And I think if we would have started with identity, we may have solved a distinct problem right away rather than kind of waiting for it. But like I said, we waited for it. We built a cool tool around it, and now we're selling it. So it worked out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I very much agree with Paul on that approach. The other approach that I've thought about is like the education aspect around it. I think there are definitely some companies out there that have done a good job of starting with education, making people aware of the problem, probably even playing up the problem, right? The word deepfake has just like been, hills and valleys in terms of when people care. And starting with that education in some capacity, I have no idea how we would have gone about it. But then kind of transitioning into that. But given what Paul mentioned, like identity is a bigger market, it's a bigger play. It can cover that deepfake aspect. So I do think that is also like probably the most viable approach. Because the other thing is, I think it's interesting to learn, and I learned it, via my background in blockchain. There's stigmas that come with every word. And like I said, deepfakes at one point was like super buzzy. And it's all about the timing and framing of kind of that product. And I think, to align with Paul, I do agree that like I think taking and framing the product as an identity product as we have really today would have helped accelerate things, just moving conversations along, because people don't think deepfake, fake image online, detection, whether that's real or not. And there's nothing you can do to convince someone otherwise once they hear that and they have that mental association, because that's really where those attacks and things and prolific incidents have really happened. I think the framing aspect of attacks is crazy. It says a lot about society in general, that you can really take a couple seconds of a phone call, of a video call, an image you scroll past, and it just immediately presets your subconscious without you really knowing about it.
Cool answers.
Perfect. Thomas, did you have any other questions?
No, I think we're good. Thank you, guys. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Cyber Talent Series. If you enjoyed the combo, make sure to subscribe on Spotify. Also follow us on YouTube and subscribe there. We'll be sharing content there as well. For ongoing tips on hiring, retaining, upskilling your cyber workforce, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and check us out at MetaCTF.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.